It's 5:02, and I think we can start. So I'm very happy today to announce our next speaker. After a short break, we are back with our Zoom series of the project Science, Faith, and Superstition. Our guest today is Professor Miloš Vuletić. Miloš is assistant professor here at the Faculty of Philosophy at the Department of Philosophy in Belgrade, and his main research interests deal with early modern philosophy. Today, Miloš is going to talk about Margaret Cavendish and her take on supernatural. Miloš, the Zoom is yours.
All right, thanks very much. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to participate in the project and to present my paper here. It's a work in progress, but I hope it'll be interesting to most of you. And thanks to everyone who's attending. So let me just start off my presentation. All right, should be it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so writing in 1666, Joseph Glanvill expressed his astonishment at what he took to be one of the remarkable features of the Age of Wonder in which he lived and worked, namely that men, otherwise witty and ingenious, are fallen into the conceit that there is no such thing as a witch or apparition, but that these are the creatures of melancholy and superstition. So in this work, Glanvill took it upon himself to defend the reality of witchcraft. And the method by which he proceeds is basically that of inference to the best explanation. So he starts from descriptions of strange occurrences, some of which he had witnessed himself, such as the famous poltergeist phenomenon of the drummer of Tedworth. And then he strives to provide the most plausible explanation of such phenomena. He rejects the possibility that cases like these could be explained by invoking artifice or deception or anything of the sort, and thinks that a more probable explanation is that there are demonic forces at work. Now, Glanvill's contribution to the witchcraft debate is a famous one, and his work on witchcraft is likely what he is best known for to this day. It's significant to note that he is, at the time, a member of the Royal Society. He signs this book as a member of the Royal Society, and he was actually, at the time, one of the most prominent early defenders and promoters of the Royal Society. As a matter of fact, as a defender of the reality of witchcraft, Glanvill was not an outlier among the friends of the new science. Right? Francis Bacon, Robert Boyle, Henry More, among others, have also expressed belief in witchcraft to a greater or lesser degree, but it's definitely there in their works and letters. Henry More is especially important and relevant for my talk because he was also someone who joined Glanvill in this project of relating what he took to be credible testimonies of occurrences which could be ascribed to witchcraft and arguing that they're best explained as instances of real, unexplained supernatural phenomena. So the way I will proceed today is first to present the motivation and argumentative strategies employed by Glanvill and More in favor of the reality of witchcraft. And then I will turn to Margaret Cavendish, and in particular, first I'll look into her critical approach to More's and Glanvill's work on witchcraft, and then talk about Cavendish's metaphysics as key in rejection. Her criticism of More and Glanvill mostly relies on epistemological complaints, epistemological points. She aims to show that their position and that their method of proceeding are unstable or perhaps even self-undermining or self-refuting. But where I think the foundation for her rejection of witchcraft really lies is actually in her metaphysics. I don't think this is a particularly novel or controversial claim, but I will try to show how one recent interpretation of Cavendish that offered by Alison Peterman in her recent papers offers, I think, an interesting sort of wrinkle to this topic. I think that it shows really well why Cavendish is perhaps better placed to reject witchcraft and any material spirits in general than Hobbes, for instance, who is also a materialist, as Cavendish is. So that's roughly the plan. Now, it wouldn't. I think it would be useful to establish the stakes of the witchcraft debate in Restoration England before proceeding to particular arguments. At the time, the interest in witchcraft and related phenomena among the philosophers and scientists was not some idle discussion of curiosities, even though at times when you read through those works, it might seem so. What was actually at stake was nothing less than answers to fundamental questions, metaphysical questions regarding the understanding of the constitution of the universe, the issue of the authority of Christian revelation, but also the problem of the nature of the scope and of the proper methods of acquisition of human knowledge. So a lot sort of is at stake, and a lot hangs on how scientists and philosophers at this period are treating the topic of witchcraft. It's a part of a much bigger sort of corpus of questions. Now I'll move to the first line of argumentation espoused by Glanvill and More. Their first sort of tack is to show that there's a close relation between religion and natural philosophy, and in particular, they try to argue that if the existence of witches is denied, then by same kind of argument, one would have to deny the existence of souls, immaterial substances in general, and ultimately God himself. Hobbes, of course, is here the main culprit and the main opponent, bugbear of sorts for More and Glanvill. So here's, for instance, what Glanvill says of place. He says that he that thinks that there's no witch believes a devil gratis. And when men are arrived to this degree of diffidence and infidelity, we are beholden to them if they believe either angel or spirit, resurrection of the body, or immortality of souls. These things hang together in a chain or connection in these men's hypotheses, and it is but a happy chance if he that hath lost one link holds another. So Hobbes is, like I said, the main target here, because he was someone who went as far as claiming that thinking substance must be material, that thought and sensation are mere movements of corporeal particles, and ultimately that God is also corporeal. Now, if witches are, non-existent, they're inconceivable even, then by the same token, God will ultimately be as well. And this is, of course, a very serious issue then. So Glanvill and More both feared this consequence of the denial of witchcraft. Additionally, if one were able to show that witches are in fact real, it would appear that an important link in the materialist argument would be broken. So that's certainly part of their motivation. Now, they have it's sort of a nuanced position that they take, because they're eager to separate mechanical philosophy, mechanical natural philosophy, from Hobbesian materialism. A monist, materialist metaphysics, in their view, was incompatible with religious belief and almost inevitably leads to atheism. On the other hand, mechanical natural philosophy was perceived by both of them as a powerful explanatory tool, which is not necessarily at odds with belief in God. So an alternative to Hobbesian natural philosophy would be one that would be, mechanical, but of positive assistance to faith. They thought that if viewed and done correctly, appropriately, this kind of natural philosophy could, in fact, provide a very valuable service to religion. So for instance, laws of matter and motion, as established by numerous 17th-century philosophers and scientists, in More's and Glanvill's opinion, these laws were indicators of some sort of mind-imposed order. And it was not uncommon to use precisely the orderly constitution of the physical world, as described by the new science, as grounds for an argument from design. So that's roughly the first line of argumentation. So it's sort of theologically inspired. The second one is epistemological. Now, witchcraft debates of the 17th century took place in an environment in which much of the methodological issues surrounding experiment and evidence were not ironed out yet. So an opponent of the reality of witches could argue that the lack of natural explanations of witchcraft-related phenomena, supposed witchcraft-related phenomena, was not yet at hand, but that this doesn't mean that there will never be such an explanation. Limitations of human knowledge have to be taken into account. Now, this is quite resonates well with the way that Boyle and Newton famously have treated gravity, for instance. Decades before Newton's famous, I feign no hypotheses quote, Boyle wrote something like this: "So having sufficiently proved that the air we live in is not devoid of weight, and is endowed with an elastical power of springiness, I endeavored by those two principles to explain the phenomena. I'm not obliged to treat of the cause of gravity in general," says Boyle. A little bit lower, he can take it for granted as a thing universally acknowledged that there is such a quality in the bodies they treat of. Now, we can see Glanvill picking up this sort of reasoning and then using it in favor of reality of witchcraft. So it's a bit of a longish quote. I'm sorry about that, but I think it's very sort of illuminating. So he says, "The strange actions related of witches and presumed impossible are not ascribed to their own powers, but to the agency of those wicked confederates they employ. And to affirm that those evil spirits cannot do that which we concede impossible is boldly to stint the powers of creatures whose natures and faculties we know not." We have to be careful. We can't be dogmatic, right? We have to sort of adopt a kind of a skeptical stance, scientifically skeptical stance. So we cannot conceive how the fetus is formed in the womb, nor as much as how a plant springs from the earth we tread on. We know not how our souls move the body, nor how these distant and extreme natures are united. And if we are ignorant of the most obvious things about us and the most considerable within ourselves, it is then no wonder that we know not the constitution and powers of the creatures to whom we are such strangers. So he sort of invokes this, as I mentioned, kind of skeptical stance as an appropriate one. And his reasoning here in favor of witchcraft actually takes on the clothes of the sound scientific method of the time. He actually thinks that he is doing something that's part of the scientific endeavor. He was very keen on convincing the Royal Society to start actually doing proper research into witchcraft and related phenomena. He took this very seriously. So what Glanvill and More were trying to do was to show that there are real effects that can be related to witchcraft. Just like we can see that there's gravity, we can take it for granted, and then who knows what might be the cause. We're not really in the business of providing hypotheses regarding that kind of phenomena. Similarly, we're supposed to proceed when it comes to witchcraft and demonic possession and things like that. And that would be, a good way of proceeding. We could do something like Baconian natural history, collect instances of this sort, and once we're really convinced that there is something there that's real kind of phenomena, real effects to be explored, then we're fine. We're sort of on firm ground, and we can proceed with scientific research of this kind of thing. And it's sort of interesting to note here that Boyle, in one letter, he related to Glanvill that although most of the witchcraft narratives were unreliable, he of course was aware of that. In science, one authentic account is sufficient to establish truth in opposition to a host of false ones. So, both More and Glanvill were kind of searching for one authentic account of that sort. And Glanvill even took it upon himself to go and to witness the poltergeist of the drummer of Tedworth, and he wrote about it, and he really heard weird noises inside that house, and was quite he was quite moved by what he had witnessed there. So okay, that's one part of their case here. We want to establish that there's something real there, real effect, much like gravity, even though we really don't know what it is that causes these occurrences of weird happening goings on. But this doesn't mean that More and Glanvill never ventured to try and offer some possible explanation or do something that very much looks like it. So possible explanations of supernatural phenomena. They were both quite keenly aware of the fact that many testimonies of alleged instances of witchcraft were not credible. And additionally, they were alert to the fact that many tales of, flying witches, demonic possession, and the like sounded so incredible as to seem utterly improbable and inconceivable. That's the kind of thing that also Hobbes would point out. So it bothered them quite a bit. Now, in order to show that such occurrences are in fact conceivable, and so to boost their probability to the level of at least possibility, Glanvill actually engages in speculation regarding their possible natural causes. So to show, this is not inconceivable. We can really, it's not just totally out there. It's not crazy. And here's why. And then Glanvill does something like this. It says that the Confederate spirit should transport the witch through the air to the place of general rendezvous. There is no difficulty in conceiving it. And if that be true, which great philosophers affirm concerning the real separability of the soul from the body without death, there is yet less. For then 'tis easy to apprehend that the soul, having left its gross and sluggish body behind it, and being clothed only with its immediate vehicle of air, or more subtle matter, may be quickly conducted to any place it would be at by those officious spirits that attend it. So we can imagine, soul and body, there's a real distinction. They're separable. So why couldn't it be the case that the soul somehow gets carried off by some very fine matter, to a different place? Of course, though I adventure to affirm nothing concerning the truth and certainty of this supposition, yet I must needs say, doth not seem to me unreasonable. And he even does something like this. He addresses the possibility that witches are possessed by evil spirits through their being drugged or poisoned or something of the sort. Here's a place like that. He says, "'Tis plain to conceive that the evil spirit, having breathed some vile vapor into the body of the witch, it may taint her blood and spirits with a noxious quality, by which her infected imagination, heightened by melancholy and this worse cause, may do much hurt upon bodies that are impressible by such influences. 'Tis very likely that this ferment disposeth the imagination of their sorcerers to cause separation of the soul from the body, and may perhaps keep the body in fit temper for its re-entry." So what he does here is, like I said, he's sort of trying to make it seem at least possible that something like witches' Sabbath is possible, that witches just fly off to their rendezvous point. And to show this, he actually offers some natural explanations of what might be taking place. Witches are possessed by evil spirits by being drugged or by being poisoned somehow. And the way that they leave their bodies is that the soul somehow gets carried off, by some material agent. This is, of course, problematic. I suppose everyone can kind of see why, but I'll come back to that. But this kind of this is where More and Glanvill come from. This is the kind of argument that they offer. The argumentation relies on the one hand on the relation between the reality of witchcraft and religious belief in God, and of course everything in between, because there's a chain of immaterial spirits, of souls, of angels, demons, and so on. This whole chain is threatened if one of the links is threatened, and that's why they're kind of staunch supporters of witchcraft. On the other hand, they try to sort of give this research of witchcraft a look of proper scientific research of the sort that's being done in the Royal Society. They try to convince members of the Royal Society to do this kind of research, and even offer kind of natural explanations for supernatural phenomena, or at least speculate as to how we might conceive such things happen. All right, so now I will move on to Cavendish and discuss her criticism of these authors that I mentioned. So 2 years before Glanvill's quote that I started with, this is what she writes: that there should be any such devilish witchcraft, which is made by a covenant and agreement with the devil, by whose power men do enchant and bewitch other creatures, I cannot readily believe. Certainly I dare say that many a good old honest woman have been condemned innocently and suffered death wrongfully by the sentence of some foolish and cruel judges, merely upon this suspicion of witchcraft, when as really there had been no such thing. So she is pretty consistently firm in her rejection of the reality of witchcraft. There are certain aspects of her work, and this is interesting. Some people have sort of started reading these works of fiction, wherein Cavendish sort of uses witches as characters. I mean, I'm not gonna go into that, because that is fiction. This is her natural philosophy. I think there are interesting relations between the two, possibly, but one also should keep in mind that she does allow for some sort of natural magic. You know, at the time, there was sort of notions of that sort having to do with natural magic, that they were sort of bleeding into the science of the day. And there's tremendous work being done by a number of historiographers who actually show how that border between revolutionary new science and some very old ideas is quite porous at the time. I mean, we all know about Newton and his alchemy and so on, for one instance of that. So her official position is that there's no devilish witchcraft. You know, there's no such thing. But what are her reasons for this position? That's the thing that I want to look into. And I think it's fair to divide them into two groups. There are objections to the reality of witchcraft that are mainly epistemological, and that aim to show that her opponent's position is unstable, if not self-refuting. And then there are metaphysical and natural philosophical reasons to prefer a materialist position, which leaves no room for immaterial substances in general, and then specifically witches. So I'll deal with these two groups in turn. First off, Jacqueline Broad wrote, I think, an important paper on Cavendish and Glanvill on witchcraft, in which she argued convincingly that Cavendish, what she does is to exploit an internal inconsistency in Glanvill's argumentation. Namely, as we saw, Glanvill aims to show, among other things, that witchcraft is probable by speculating on various natural explanations of the phenomena coming from the witchcraft lore. But now, if natural explanations are conceivable, if explanations in natural or even material terms are conceivable, then it would seem that this should lower rather than increase our confidence in the claim that these occurrences are due to supernatural or immaterial causes. So if you do something like this, you're actually opening the door for someone saying, well, yeah, sure. Then, Webster, famous, opponent of witchcraft, is probably right, because he wrote about occult qualities that account for whatever it is that we perceive to be a matter of witches causing someone harm. So Glanvill actually goes one step further than he ought to when he ventures into this territory of speculating about some possible natural causes of the effects that he ascribes to witchcraft. On the other hand, Cavendish also attacks the line of argument that links the denial of witchcraft to atheism. She finds it problematic that her opponents posit numerous immaterial, supernatural entities as sort of intermediaries between God and creation, and she finds that this puts one, adopting this kind of thing puts one in danger of idolatry and blasphemy. So in both regards, it looks like what she does is to turn the tables on Glanvill and More, aiming to show on the one hand that their lines of reasoning can cut their lines of reasoning can cut both ways. So on the one hand, attempting to show that witchcraft is possible, they boost the likelihood of natural explanations of phenomena, target phenomena. And on the other hand, by arguing that belief in witchcraft and immaterial spirits is vitally related to religious belief, they run the risk of undermining religious belief itself. So that's the part of Cavendish's take on witchcraft that has to do with epistemology and with these theological considerations that More and Glanvill adopt and employ in their arguments. Now I want to move to Cavendish's metaphysics. Now, everything I've said so far about Cavendish's criticism of Glanvill and More sort of amounts to the conclusion at best that Glanvill and More do not have terrific arguments in favor of the existence of witches. But still, this doesn't suffice really for the conclusion that there is no devilish witchcraft, as she puts it in the quote from earlier on. What I think is that the real reason for her rejection of witchcraft lies actually in her materialism, in her materialist natural philosophy. So much like Hobbes, who was a great influence on Cavendish, she read him closely, and she was, it's obvious in numerous places, she kind of recycles some of the arguments and positions that were first put forth by Hobbes, but then she parts ways with him in some very important ways that I will come to in a moment. So, much like Hobbes, she staunchly defends the view that all that is natural must also be material or corporeal. And this, by all appearances, holds in Cavendish's view for spirits as well, if there are such entities. She says, whether angels and devils are material, that is not declared in Scripture. For though they are named spirits, yet we know not whether those spirits be material. But considering that hell and heaven is described to be material, it is probable spirits are also material. So that's also part of her view. Even if, she says that all that's natural must also be material and corporeal, she wants to bring into, this sort of world of the material, the spirits as well, if there are such things. She also follows Hobbes in asserting that immaterial substances or immaterial things, materials, are simply inconceivable. But her materialism, as I mentioned a moment ago, is quite different from Hobbes's. Most significantly, Cavendish rejects mechanical natural philosophy of Hobbes and Descartes and others. In her opinion, it's not the case that because all that is natural is material or corporeal, that then all that exists are these moving and colliding material bodies characterized essentially by geometrical properties. She doesn't buy that part of the Cartesian and Hobbesian package. Now, her complaints against mechanical philosophy are numerous. They're diverse. It's certainly not something that I want to get into right now. They're also quite interesting, I think. But for present purposes, the most important point of disagreement concerns fundamental notions of mechanical philosophy, motion and transfer of motion. In particular, Cavendish has strong objections to the idea that change can be explained using causal explanations that invoke communication by impulse. One thing sort of gives motion to another. She finds this very problematic. And she actually finds herself in good company here, you know, like when sort of raising doubts about mechanical philosophy's treatment of motion and transfer of motion. Throughout the 17th century, this, you know, it's really well established by now, but throughout the 17th century, mechanical philosophy was met with objections to the effect that certain phenomena cannot be explained appropriately by relying only on rearrangement in space or change of motion of invisible material corpuscles, invisible to the naked eye. Now, everyday phenomena like magnetism, like gravity, motion, appeared to present mechanical philosophy with insuperable difficulties. So Cavendish is in good company here, generally speaking, and motion in particular was a great source of frustration in the 17th century. You take Cartesian rules for transference of motion from one particle to another, his belief that the total amount of motion in the universe was always constant. And these, I mean, people thought that these weren't really explanatory. You kind of have to take them on faith. And so many authors actually chose to involve some sort of active principle within matter or outside of matter, but, you know, having to do with matter in some way, an active principle in order to explain transference of motion. So, for instance, Leibniz, of course, he famously thought that, you know, souls, substantial forms of some sort have to be involved. Henry Moore thought that there was this all-pervading spirit of nature, which was immaterial and served as sort of an intermediary between God and material creation, and so on. These were the sources of the active principle that was able to kind of put everything in motion and to secure transference of motion. You know, inert matter just wouldn't cut it, in the opinion of many 17th century philosophers. Others were also doubtful of the claim that no new motion can be created in the universe. They would point out to you know, phenomena like the ignition of gunpowder. There it seems like, you know, lots of new motion gets created. And this sort of dissatisfaction with the treatment of motion from the treatment of motion in the early mechanical philosophy reached its apex of sorts, perhaps because of you know, the fact that it was Newton who kind of put it into his own words, but, you know, famously he was someone who also was dissatisfied with these aspects of mechanical philosophy. So in the Optics, he says, the vis inertia is a passive principle by which bodies persist in their motion or rest, receive motion in proportion to the force impressing it, and resist as much as they are resisted. By this principle alone, there never could have been any motion in the world. Some other principle was necessary for putting bodies into motion. And now they are in motion, some other principle is necessary for conserving the motion. So additional principles of some sort are needed, and he thought that some kind of occult, some kind of hidden active principle needs to be invoked in order to explain the initiation and preservation of motion. Like I said, you know, inert matter just doesn't cut it. At the same time, substantial forms of the scholastics were being rejected by the adherents of the new science and philosophy. So the discontent with the mechanical philosophy led to an adoption of various kinds of active principles. So some resorted to substantial forms. I mentioned Leibniz. Some thought that there are non-material intermediaries that are needed in order to secure this sort of active principle that is lacking. More spirit of nature is an example there. Others invoked immaterial plastic natures that are dispersed in matter. Rafe Cudworth is probably the most prominent representative of this kind of view. Yet others thought that some sort of subtle, ethereal, material agent is to be sort of pointed out as responsible for this active principle. And then there was Cavendish, right? She had a different approach here. She thought that motion is inherent to matter, that all matter is actually self-moving, perceptive, and knowledgeable. So she basically, I mean, I don't know if I should even say this, it probably oversimplifies things, but she simply placed everything that we would traditionally ascribe to the functions of the soul. She just, put all that into matter, and that was it. Matter is self-moving, matter is perceptive, matter has knowledge, and all matter has all this because there are different sort of kinds of matter, different degrees of matter, and they are really well mixed, so that whichever bit of matter you take, there will be parts that are capable of perception, parts that are capable of knowledge, and parts that are kind of just like that. But I won't go into that. It would take us too far afield. Suffice it to say that, this is the kind of thing that it's nothing external. Motion is not external to bodies. It doesn't come from either from some sort of form or from spirit of nature or from, like some immaterial nature or from some subtle material agent that kind of mills about. It's inherent to matter. Matter itself is self-moving. Now, okay, so this seems to leave very little room for immaterial spirits, right? And of course, she doesn't think there are any. We have no need to rely on plastic natures. We don't have to rely on the spirit of nature, anything of the sort. These immaterial principles are simply of no use to Cavendish in natural philosophy, and so she denies their existence. And by extension, we can see how there will also be no room for evil spirits that possess humans or enter into contracts with them, and so on. Now, there's still one possibility, one theoretical possibility that doesn't seem to be excluded yet. One possibility for how we could still have something immaterial out there, even if matter is self-moving, perceptive, and knowledgeable, and so on. It could be that spiritual qualities of some sort can be responsible for the occurrences ascribed to spirits. Now to better appreciate this possibility, I'd like to briefly consider magnetism, which is another phenomenon which caused mechanical philosophers headaches and was often ascribed at the time to magical or occult qualities or spirits of some sort. Now, on one hand, there was von Helmont, who was an author Cavendish engaged with carefully and wrote about and argued against. And he advanced the view that there were magnetic rays that emanate from the lodestone, which sort of attracts iron as a metal, which are not corporeal, but are spiritual qualities of some kind. Qualities purely spiritual, as he puts it. On the other hand, with respect to magnetism, we have another influential account, which is due to Henry Power. He was an important 17th century author on the problem of magnetism. And he was of the opinion that if magnetism is intrinsic to matter, then this is tantamount to putting some sort of soul or intelligence into the stone, into the lodestone. So he opted for a different solution, and he argued that magnetism is an external phenomenon and not an internal property of the lodestone. According to him, magnetism was due to particles extrinsic to lodestone, which approach it and find these congruous pores and inlets therein and are being channeled through it. So it's that kind of an account. So it's basically, some sort of mechanical account, but certainly it seems like all the work and the explanation can be done by material entities. No spiritual qualities needed. So Cavendish seems to be facing at least these two explanatory options. On the one hand, there's the option of going with Power's view, which relies on sort of mechanical solution of invoking the motion of corpuscles. On the other hand, there's the Helmontian option of invoking spiritual qualities. Now the first option, Henry Power's option, is foreclosed for Cavendish. She just doesn't accept this kind of mechanical account, apparently rules it out. But it's not clear that Van Helmont's option is ruled out as well, because there's a possibility that it could be the case that some sort of spiritual quality of magnetism is something that is superadded to a material object. This thought of super addition was something that was kind of in the air at the time. Most famously, Locke talks about cognition, consciousness being superadded to matter. But Cavendish herself has places which sound a lot like, she doesn't use this sort of terminology, but it sounds a lot like she's talking about a similar kind of thing. So it's not exactly too far-fetched, I would say. On the face of it, it's not too far-fetched to think that she may have been aware of an option of this sort. Perhaps, what people ascribe to spirits is a kind of thing, is a kind of quality of some sort that can be superadded to matter. So she rejects both these options when it comes to magnetism, and opts for a position according to which magnetism is intrinsic to bodies. Doesn't matter what Henry Power says. If it's intrinsic to bodies, it doesn't have to be some kind of a soul or a spirit. It can still be entirely material. And she opts to explain magnetism along with all the phenomena that can somehow be related to sympathy and antipathy, which are, of course, notions that cross the border between natural magic and natural philosophy in the 17th century. And she says it's nothing else but the action of bodies. So that magnetism is nothing else but actions of bodies. And the sympathy betwixt iron and the lodestone is in bodies. Sympathy betwixt the needle and the north, sorry for the typo, is in bodies. And finally, she says that magnetism is naturally affected by natural means without the concurrence of immaterial spirits, either good or bad, and so on, merely by natural corporeal sensitive motions, which is an important notion in physics. Now, I think it's interesting to think about this solution and see how does it fare. Does it really provide some sort of an option that would rule out both the alternatives that I've briefly sketched? How is it supposed to be different from the mechanical explanations, and how is it that it precludes a possibility of some sort of spiritual quality being superadded? And this is where I think that Alison Peterman's recent interpretive work is valuable. So on Peterman's interpretation, motion for Cavendish is not a property of bodies. And when Cavendish talks about motion, she doesn't really have local motion in mind. Instead, her conception of motion is just composition and division of parts of matter. Motion is pretty much synonymous with change, and all change and all motion ultimately will come down to composition and division of parts of matter. This is part of a broader interpretation of Cavendish, according to which Cavendish actually defends a very radical metaphysical picture, one that is non-hierarchical, in the sense that the very distinction between independent and dependent metaphysical entities is denied. In other words, there's no distinction between substances and accidents in Cavendish. This is what Peterman, I think, pretty forcefully tries to show. And one thing that Peterman puts emphasis on is Cavendish's frequent expressions of the view that the features of material bodies are identical to them, such as these. So motion and body are not two several substances, but motion and matter made one self-moving body. And so was place, color, figure, etc., all one and the same with body. This too, if you conceive matter to be one thing, figure another, and motion a third, several, distinct and dividable from each other, it will produce gross errors. For matter, motion, and figure are but one thing. Finally, all natural qualities or accidents must of necessity be corporeal. By reason, quality can no more be divided from matter than figure, magnitude, color, place, and the like, all which are but one and the same with the body, without any separation or abstraction. So simultaneously, with such expressions of identity of bodies and their features, Cavendish criticizes the very idea that there are property-like entities, be they modes or real accidents. She offers numerous arguments to that effect, that there are no property-like entities. Mostly because she just doesn't buy the idea that there's something that could be less than real, sort of have some sort of diminished reality. So it's just matter. When you start talking about properties as dependent on some other sort of being, she thinks that's just leads into very, very bad places. It's a source of huge philosophical errors in her opinion. Now, her alternative proposal is basically, according to Peterman here, to reduce qualities to what she calls corporeal figurative motions. That's Cavendish's expression, not Peterman's. Where crucially, this motion is not to be understood as local motion, but like I said, as composition and division of matter. And ultimately, Peterman reads Cavendish as holding that matter is just divisible stuff, and that all distinctions between things are just parthood distinctions. Now, this is a kind of view that one might characterize as a way of going back, right? Historically speaking, think about history of philosophy. Aristotelianism is under immense amount of pressure at the time. People are really not happy with it anymore, but they mostly don't go back to Platonism, for instance. Some do, right? But most of the reaction is kind of to go back to people like Adams. And Cavendish kind of does a similar sort of thing, because people have compared, Peterman in particular, her view of matter as just this stuff that is alive and self-moving and perceptive and knowledgeable, but that is entirely to be explained in terms of mereological relations. She has compared this to Stoic idea of perfect mixture and so on. So it seems like it's this sort of that she's riding the wave of moving back from Aristotle to ideas that sort of have their source in pre-Socratic philosophy, for instance. There are certain similarities with Anaxagoras as well. First, there's no nous, I suppose, but okay, that's a digression. Shouldn't go down that path. So, okay, just to sum up, now, if this is so, if we can characterize the entire reality in terms of this divisible stuff, and if we can account for all the properties of matter that we perceive or that we're sort of inclined to ascribe to matter, if we can account for them in terms of figurative motion, which is in the end just composition and division of parts of matter, then we have no need for substance, accidents, metaphysics, and ipso facto, it just seems like the very idea that certain spiritual qualities can be superadded to matter is ruled out. Right? So that would be one way to see how this particular interpretation of Cavendish that's offered by Alison Peterman It seems to me that it offers a sort of a promising way of seeing where from comes Cavendish's confidence in denying the materials, even in the face of certain theoretical possibilities that she may have been aware of by reading Van Helmont and other authors at the time. So one also might note that it would seem that she really goes further than most other 17th century authors at the time in rejecting the scholastic approach and the scholastic framework. It's not just that substantial forms are kicked out of metaphysics. It's the very distinction between substance and accidents, and it really looks like. I mean, it's of course it's an interpretation. It's not without its problems and all that, but it seems like Peterman might be onto something there that Cavendish really does try to convince her readers that a lot of philosophical errors and issues stem from the fact that we kind of cling to this idea. I mean, even people like Hobbes and Descartes cling to this idea that we should distinguish between substance and accidents. Okay, I'll wrap up here, and yeah, thanks for your attention. Questions and comments are welcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Miloš, for a very interesting talk, and very informative for us who are not really who are not dwelling in the 17th century. So it was very informative. Yeah, I'm opening the discussion. So if anybody has questions, please go ahead. Yeah, Rastko, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, Miloš. This was a really interesting talk, and I learned a lot, but I think that there's some things I still don't understand. So this may be a dumb question. I'm not sure if the sentiment that Cavendish has is really, let's say, philosophically justified, because it seems to me that her view on matter and causality is a lot richer, explanatory richer, let's say, and more plastic, more flexible than mechanistic view on matter. So there seems to me that there is a kind of still an open possibility, let's say, of interpreting witchcraft as a kind of let's say a materialistic process. So all of these processes that are usually called spiritual, and that the witches are a part of, are actually materialistic, but on Cavendish definition of the term, which is this a lot richer notion of matter. Her definition of matter as possessing different kinds of knowledge, and her definition of causality, which is, let's say, a communicative model of causality, seems to me to leave open. Even Glanvill had a kind of a naturalistic, let's say, reinterpretation, but it seems that Cavendish metaphysical background would be even more powerful, or would be able to explain even weirder interactions, let's say, between parts of matter. So maybe there is this kind of let's say, subdetermination of the view on witchcraft on the basis of her metaphysics. So if we reinterpreted all the spiritualistic notions into the materialistic framework of hers, there may be even actually there would be no problem possibly with the existence of witchcraft. That is what I want to say. So maybe she has like an independent negative sentiment towards witchcraft. Actually, obviously, I don't know enough.
I have just to add to this, because I had the same question. So, another example that might clarify what Rastko was saying. When we read Saint Augustine, for instance, and when we read the parts of Christian doctrine, or the parts that concern the existence of demons and angels and miracles, he's fairly specific, and he says the only being that can make miracles is God, and miracle consists in creation. Everything else that is part of the acts of demons or angels is not truly miracle. What their actions consist of is to invoke, because they have special powers, they can invoke hidden powers of that God planted in things, and they can actually make them appear, and that looks like miracles to us. But demons and angels are part of this world, created world. They have special powers. Demons are fallen angels, but they kept these special powers as well. So, but they are actually creatures like us, part of this world, with these special powers. Now, of course, in his metaphysics or his ontology, the spiritual substances are there, so they are spirits, and but that's part of this Baroque enchanted world. But now, what Rastko was saying, it appeared to me that she actually can accommodate, and she can say, well, witches, demons, and angels are like creatures like us, even though with a little bit more powers that now we have to explain. So it looked to me that she could accommodate if she wanted to, but that she didn't want that, of course. Anyway, so yeah. Sorry about this. Yeah.
No. That's great. Thanks. Right. So, okay. So she certainly thought that there was some sort of natural magic. She talks about it. She talks about sympathy, antipathy. She talks about magnetism and things like that, and groups them into this kind of natural magic type of thing, and then contrasts that with witchcraft. It seems to me that, right, she could have the resources to kind of allow for witches and the like. I think that what she found problematic was that those were mostly or commonly or sort of as a rule treated as spiritual, as somehow not within the realm of this, divisible, recomposable stuff that can kind of get separated and then joined together. Now there are attempts to read Cavendish in a more sort of like feminist key and use arguments of that sort. So that would be one, I suppose, one area of research that one could get into, because she mentioned, like many a good old woman who got accused and so on. It could be that there's something there as well, talking about motivations of that sort. What I think is that she probably thought that the witchcraft lore and everything related to that type of thinking was inextricably bound with the idea that something spiritual is out there, and that she thought that this is really the target that she should aim at and destroy. But it's a good point. I mean, it does seem like it's open to her to much like she says about many natural phenomena. This stuff is hidden from us. It's who could know how nature acts, in many different areas, and there are these minute motions or very very So there's a lot that's hidden.
You know, the funny thing is that when you go into the Middle Ages and late antiquity, how they explain the works of demons and sorcerers who invoke demons or ask for their help and these occult forces. So St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas later on, they would say, they actually, because they have these superpowers, they're faster than we are. They see better than we do. They are they have all these capacities enhanced. They can actually perform healing or predict the future. That's all evil, right? But they can do it because they are, and it looks as a miracle to us, but they are actually using the natural sources that God planted in this world. So that's the idea. Like, so they are kind of superhumans, and
superheroes,
asking them evil thing, and you are ruining your own soul because of that when you ask them to help you out. But yeah, that's how it works. So they really looked for the natural explanation of these superhumans, so to speak. So it's kind of funny. Anyway, it's just a comment. I think that David Alice is next to be the question, but we can continue, of course.
Can I have just a quick follow-up?
Okay, Rasko, follow up, and then David.
Sorry, David. What would be the difference then between natural magic and let's say some kind of unusual technology? I mean, if there is something like natural magic, would it be easily to say?
So when you say unusual technology, what do you have in mind?
Well, it seems to me that if we are materialists, if there is nothing spiritual and there is something called natural magic, then it's possible to have like this view on the, like, let's say something kind of alchemistic, for instance. So we don't really know how the process works, but we hope to establish a consequence which is really useful or interesting for us. So we don't know the let's say how these elements are transformed or stuff like that. But I guess that would be the closest thing to natural magic. I guess maybe it wouldn't be magic. It wouldn't be called magic at all if we actually knew all of these details of the process. I'm not sure what would natural magic be if not that.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I mean, that's more or less it. You know, the everyday phenomena that just seem to escape, escape explanation. Even when we have on board finest, most promising, and most potent scientific theories, I believe that. I mean, there's also, of course, a tradition of what is it that, you know, what natural magic is, and how the book of nature is full of these wonders. But it's it seems to me that part of natural magic that bleeds into the modern science is basically that type of thing. You know, like it's these things that we kind of can observe more or less reliably, or with a more or less reliable testimonies of their occurrences, and they very much escape our ability to explain them. So it's magnetism, and it's sympathy and antipathy of different kinds. You know, why it happens that when you put one piece of fruit next to another, it just rots really quickly or something like that. I mean, there's a lot that, you know, it's just really hard to kind of comprehend what goes on, and on the level of everyday occurrences like that, but then also, you know, like stuff like gravity. I mean, gravity is everything, but it's really huge. Sorry for rambling.
No, that's okay. So David, sorry about this. So you're next.
Don't worry at all. So Thank you. Really interesting talk. So it got me thinking, and then especially when the conversation turned towards miracles, and of course I'm really interested in that sort of stuff. So I had maybe two questions on that theme, and I think you've already addressed them, but I suppose I wanted to tease out a bit more detail. The first is being, do you think that from the perspective of a person, we would be unable to distinguish magic and a miracle? Or do you think it'd be self-evident that we would know it as a miracle? We wouldn't be looking at Christ walking on water and thinking, hey, is this magic? Or is it going to be, no, this is a miracle and there's something distinct about it? And then the second, or sort of follow-up, would be, if it was reversed, if it was a non-natural entity, say, so if when it's Satan tempting Christ, would we say that Satan there is doing magic? Because I wouldn't want to say it's a miracle, but at the same time, it's not natural magic either. It feels like in this awkward position of supernatural conduct from, I don't know if we would want to say Satan's a divine entity, but from something of that equivalent, right? And it seems to put it in this middle position. So yeah, so there's two questions there. Do you think it'll be self-evident that you're seeing a miracle versus magic, or do you think we could ever be confused? And then the second one is, if it is a supernatural entity, which is not a good one, is it doing magic, or is it a miracle, or is it somewhere awkwardly in between?
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. I have to say I haven't really given this sort of distinction that you mentioned in your first question much thought. It is kind of tricky. I guess it would certainly depend on how religiously loaded the notion of miracle is. That would be my assumption, that a lot would hang on that, because there's a sense, of course, in which you can kind of group all supernatural occurrences either into some sort of magic or into some sort of a miracle, insofar as, like the natural order of the world is somehow being interrupted or messed with or something of the sort. But okay, that might be a useful distinction, right? Because magic could be something that's, especially if we're talking about natural magic, it could be something that's actually quite in line with the order of the world. It's just hidden from us how it is that it works. And right, in that sense, okay. So that's, yeah. I'm not sure if it would be self-evident though. It might be a matter of how, natural history. Now, speaking from the point of view of 17th century kind of outlook, it could be that some sort of natural history would be helpful there. So if we see a bunch of time, lodestone attracting nails, like iron nails or something like that, then it's kind of it might look as though it's a kind of thing that falls under some sort of a law of nature or something like that. I mean, the notion was not really there to be invoked. But whereas on the other hand, if you have something miraculous happening, it seems like it's a kind of thing that just sort of. But there are miracles, right? That also reoccur, right? I mean, aren't there? There are, yeah. So I don't know. I was just. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suppose, like I said, it would depend on how, how much of a religious load, so to speak, the notion of miracle holds. As for the second question, yeah, also, I'm kind of baffled there. I don't know if I have a ready answer. What would be if we have some sort of an entity that is not God, but sort of, right? Can angels and evil demons perform miracles? I suppose I don't have I don't really have a considered answer to that question. But yeah, sorry.
Thomas Aquinas, I just wanted to say that Thomas Aquinas makes that distinction. So
right.
He makes distinction between several kinds of miracles, and one kind would be the one that you mentioned. The first kind is when God acts through the laws of nature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, laws of meaning according to the ways things happen in nature. That can actually, and of course, demons and angels can do similar thing to, you have a tree planted and they can make it grow faster, but kind of following the laws of nature, sort of. But then you have the miracles that are contrary to laws of nature. So, and then you have, we always imagine the huge walls of water and then a clear bottom and everybody walks through. So, now, I'm not sure, but I think that he thinks that the kind of speeding up things can be performed to a certain extent by lower beings, but the true miracle can be done only, like true contrary to the laws of nature by God. Right. So I think, I cannot guarantee, but I think he does, he says, he makes that distinction. And the other thing is, also when we, like the healing, miraculous healing, for example, it can actually fix the processes that the remedies failed to fix. But again, according to the sort of laws of nature, like that kind of thing. So there is this distinction, and I'm really like interested in, like, that's why I happen to know it, because I'm really interested into these find distinctions where the laws of nature are kind of broken and when they are followed but fastened and they look like a miracle to us. I don't know. I hope I had at least some answers.
No, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, no, that is very helpful. Yeah, because I suppose, right, with Hume, it's a violation of the laws of nature, versus manipulation of them would be something different, I suppose.
Okay, any more questions? If not, I would like to thank Miloš for a wonderful talk. And our next talk is after Orthodox Easter in May. And I think it will be on May 9th. And we'll go in the past, to the past again, to the late antiquity. But stay in touch. We'll keep you posted. So see you in May. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Miloš.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.